Ben Landry, famous name Landry,
Right.
in Texas.
Right.
So
But all the real Landrys come from Louisiana.
so you're here today on Honor Cafe. Tell us a little bit about where you're from.
So I'm from South Louisiana. Grew up in a little town called Donaldsonville, about 50 miles south of Baton Rouge in the swamps. And then I went to school at McNeese State, got my undergraduate in McNeese, and then I joined the military as an officer, joined the Air Force. And
So you joined it, and you were initially a nurse.
Mhm.
And how did you get into anesthesia?
So I was a nurse. I worked as a civilian for about 9 months. And as you know, Rob, you have to work a while in critical care before you can apply. So when I was about to apply for anesthesia school in Louisiana, the one school there had they lost their charter for something, whatever. We won't get into that. But so I was looking for a way to go to school, and I was really tired of paying student loans. So I started looking around for different options, and Air Force nursing was appealing to me. So I went to a recruiter. I told him I was a RN with a bachelor's degree, and the guy stood up immediately. And 6 months later, I was on active duty. They sent me to Keesler Air Force Base, my first duty station, and I went right up to critical care, open heart ICU nurse, critical thoracic ICU, and while I was there, I was a young second lieutenant. The commander there, they all thought I was prior military. My mama taught me how to be a man. My mom and my dad, and I was always yes ma'am, yes sir. Always walked with my shoulders back. I guess to a lot of people, I looked like I had been in the Army, and I used to get that all the time. Well, how long were you in the Army? And they thought I was prior enlisted. So I guess just the way I carried myself, my commander really took a hold of me. She loved me. And they had this new thing coming out called Critical Care Air Transport, which is a CCAT team now.
Yeah.
And they were, the general at the time of the Air Force was trying to get these teams together just in case there'd be some, for war. And they were meant to transport critical patients like a flying ICU, something we didn't have at the time. And so I was one of the first guys to go to CCAT school in San Antonio. Well, that was in the summer of 2001. And lo and behold, after September 11th, I was a young second lieutenant with this thing on my resume, and I was going pretty quick. I mean, I left that night. So that was kind of how my deployment started. Was a critical care flight nurse with CCAT teams, and went to Afghanistan for that. I went up to New York actually for September 11th to fly patients out. We didn't do anything because patients were either all dead or all alive. They weren't very much in the middle. And then while I was there, my wife and I had gotten together and made sure we had all my paperwork ready for anesthesia school. And she actually turned in everything and got some signatures for me. And the day I got back, I found out I got accepted to anesthesia school.
Is that the time when the Air Force was going to the Army program, or did you have your own program at that time?
There were two programs at the time. There was Uniformed Services University, which is where I went. It was Navy, Air Force, Army, and Public Health Service would be in the same class. We had several Army guys I'm friends with today. And then you had the Army program in San Antonio.
I know that was always a competition,
Yeah, and it's funny, later in my career, the competition at the Uniformed Services University was pretty dramatic. I mean, the Army guys competing with the Air Force guys. I mean, you had the individual competition going on, but just the fact that you're Air Force and you're Army and you're Navy, which most of the Navy guys dropped out, by the way, but anyway, we won't get into that. So me and the Army guys would go at it, for who's going to graduate first, who made the best grades. It was really stimulating. And we all studied together. We'd be in a room like this and drawing stuff on the boards and stuff like that. It was great camaraderie. And honestly, it's the reason why I was in JSOC.
So to backstep just a second, because a lot of our viewers don't understand the dynamics of what a CRNA is, what that is in the military, in the right now, I think the Army's program, for years, the Army's program was like number one. Air Force goes to it, VA goes to it. It's it's a step above. It's a different
Right.
animal, all complete. So explain to people what that is.
So, nurse anesthetist, we do anesthesia. In the military, especially, we're very independent anesthesia providers. That's not much different than it is, as civilians. A lot of rural communities, you think you're seeing an anesthesiologist, but really, there are only nurse anesthetists out at most of these rural communities. A nurse anesthetist is the only nurse who is a truly independent provider. We don't need doctors telling us what to do or writing orders for us. We write our own orders. We do our own medications. So we're very independent of everybody else in the hospital. In the military, an anesthesiologist and a nurse anesthetist have the same deployment roles. So, if an anesthesiologist gets sick right before deployment, guess who takes their place? It's a nurse anesthetist. And that's happened quite a bit. In Special Forces, I can tell you that the Joint Special Operations Command has never had an anesthesiologist.
That's actually why I chose the role, was because if you're making a choice of what you want to do on a JSOX team, you're either going to be a surgeon or an anesthesia provider, and the only way to be an anesthesia provider in Special Forces is to go to
be a nurse anesthetist,
and that's with military training.
And the reason for that is because they wanted blue collar workers. We're the blue collar workers. Even today, you go to the OR, you're going to maybe meet an anesthesiologist. Anesthesiologist isn't doing your anesthesia. The nurse anesthetist is doing your anesthesia. He's responsible for you 100%. We collaborate with anesthesiologists. Most places I've worked, there's no anesthesiologist. So me and the surgeons collaborate. Most surgeons who have surgery ask me to do their anesthesia. They don't ask the anesthesiologist.
Yeah.
And it's the same reason, because the JSOC surgical team was surgeon driven. And it's the surgeons that wanted nurse anesthetists there. They work with them every day. They wanted the blue collar workers. And I was told that by a full board colonel who was the leader of the unit at the time, the commander. And because I asked him that question, and he says, we want blue collar workers.
That's an interesting point too, because a lot of us come from the enlisted ranks, and so we're being in the military, being with every level of the military, the way we work with surgeons, and the fact that even the entry level for anesthesia education is a doctorate level.
Uh-huh.
So it's a lot of schools, the undergraduates, the years of training in the ICU, then 3-year program that they have now. So it's a lot of school, even.
It is.
So you may be called a blue collar worker, but
yeah, we're the ones putting people to sleep and waking them up and giving the blood and putting the big lines in. In a regular places like now, we do all the nerve blocks. I pick up all the incompetencies of a lot of physicians that are, I work in Huntsville now. If an ER doctor can't get an airway, they call me. If they can't get a central line, they call me. Same thing in the ICU. We do all the epidurals. We take care of all the OB at night. We're it. If there's any emergency, the ER doc really has a hard time handling stuff sometimes. And the next guy up is the CRNA. A lot of people don't realize what we bring to the table, especially, not to toot my own whistle or Rob's own whistle, but especially military trained guys. I've put in, we've done so much trauma and stuff like that and saved so many lives. The surgeon may actually clamp the artery that ultimately saves that life, but it's the nurse anesthetist giving the blood, starting the lines, managing them while they're under anesthesia. And for somebody in JSOC, it was doing that on helicopters, doing that on airplanes, doing that in the backs of Humvees, doing it on the ground. I mean, this is things that people don't ever see. And so when you put me in a hospital in a setting with all this cool stuff, I mean, it's pretty easy,
So let's get back to that. And a lot of people don't understand the amount of trauma. I mean, they see TV shows, but
right.
But I mean, when you're doing trauma and you're deployed, or when you're JSOX, you probably do more trauma in 6 months than most people do in a lifetime.
Absolutely.
But
Absolutely.
But explain the role of JSOX.
So JSOC, Joint Special Operations. I can't say a lot because it is a top secret unit. Even though you can find a lot of stuff on the internet about it, you can find very little about the surgical team. So I won't say too much about it, except for the fact that the surgeons and the nurse anesthetists in that unit are they're top of the food chain. The surgeons are incredible.
They are.
I mean, they're very cool. There's no rank involved. We're there to do a job, and that job is to save lives of some of the most highly trained soldiers, sailors, yada yada yada,
$1 million assets
in the world. And I'll just leave it at that as far as who we're taking care of. But we trained a lot. We trained and tried to rock drill everything we could possibly do. Training was incredible. I can't tell you how many times I've thrown up training because we're in an airplane yanking and banking and stuff like that. We're in helicopters simulating, getting shot at. Everything was at night. We would train over and over and over. I have a bag in my truck right now. You can look at it, and it's set up the same way I set up my bags at night. I mean, even the way I put my zippers, everything was attention to detail. And the reason why I got into that is because in the middle of the wars, in the middle of the 2000s, we had two wars going on, right? We were in Iraq, we're in Afghanistan. 2006, I'd already done a couple of deployments. One as a CCAT nurse, one as an anesthetist. So now I was a flyer with combat experience, and I was a nurse anesthetist with combat experience. So the general at the time that was in charge of JSOC wrote an MOU to start pulling other service members to get into that unit.
And let's stop you right there, because this is a big deal.
It had only been Army.
I'm a teacher horn. The Army owns these spots.
Absolutely.
It is our world. And you were the first.
I was the first Air Force guy. They brought in me. They brought in an Air Force surgeon, who I keep in touch with today. He was a cardiac surgeon. They brought in a Navy surgeon, and they brought in a Navy nurse anesthetist, who, by the way, was a prior Navy SEAL, which I thought that was cheating, but whatever. He had to lose some weight when he got there, but he did. So I felt pretty honored. The process to get into that unit is not easy.
No,
it's not like getting a secret clearance. This is a top secret clearance. I mean, it's just like the movies. Guys with black suits knocking on your neighbor's doors. My brothers were contacted. My parents, everybody. I mean, they get into your personal business, and then if you pass all that, they bring you there and they do some really interpersonal interviews. I mean, they're all into your business. And the reason for that is because when you're in that unit, you're all brothers at that point. Everybody needs to know everything about each other, because there's a good chance that you're going to get killed, and they need to know how to approach your family, who they knew my wife's names. They knew my kids' names. They knew everything about me, and I knew everything about them. And that was important. You had to have that kind of going along, because when you got deployed with these guys, you may not come home. I mean, there was a good chance you're going to get shot and killed. Chances of me getting shot and killed, maybe on a helicopter or something. We did a lot of ground stuff. More than likely, it'd been a helicopter crash.
Yeah.
I mean, we were on helicopters every night, or airplanes, whatever, all over the world. And I did missions all over the world.
When I tell people, what it's like in that role, I said, you have two pieces in that role. You have and I let me clarify. I was never into the depths of missions that you got to do, but it's interesting when you don't have a patient, you can be the door gunner, and that's the fun.
Absolutely.
And then you're pulling security. You
Yeah.
know?
So to speak to that, so in Iraq, a lot of times we fly around on little birds. Well, as you know, if you've been on a little bird, you are the gunner, right? You're the gunner.
Yeah.
And we were told, you see any flash, shoot back. I mean, so that's kind of cool, and we did missions all over the world. Rob and I were talking earlier how, some of my Air Force counterparts who were in Air Force Special Operations, that's what we consider white side Special Forces. They have all these cool, resumes. They talk about all the missions they've done. In this role, we don't talk about them. I mean, what you're hearing now is about the most I ever say about it. Pretty boring otherwise, right? I mean, there's no listing of all the missions I've done. I've probably done, I don't know, a couple of hundred missions between the two teams I was with. Rob and I both have Bronze Stars. I'm not sure how you got yours. Mine was mailed to me.
Yeah, mine was too. Mine was mailed.
It was
me.
mailed to me, and my wife was pretty pissed about that.
Yeah, so was mine. Mine was upset. How do you get a Bronze Star through an email?
I was the only Air Force anesthetist, that had. That's not true. There was one other nurse anesthetist who'd gotten a Bronze Star early in the war. They'd gotten. I've read her story and I've met her a few times. That was totally by accident, though.
Yeah.
I mean, she did her job. She did a great job, but that situation came along for her, unlike mine. I mean, I was kind of, we volunteered for this thing we were doing, and we truly did things that nurse anesthetists don't normally do.
Yeah.
And we did them on a daily basis, a nightly basis, and my wife, our families were a part of that, right? I was I was stationed, so get to back how that actually worked. I was stationed in San Antonio, but my ass belonged to Fort Bragg and the Army. So, when I wasn't home, I was either training, I was training someone, I was being trained, I was on a training mission, or I was deployed. And that took up most of the year. That was 7-8 months out of the year.
It's hard on the family. A lot of JSOC guys end up divorced.
So when that came in the mail, my wife opened it. It wasn't like, "Oh, congratulations, honey." She was like, "What the hell is this? Why are they mailing you this? You need to bring this to the hospital so the general can recognize you."
Yeah.
And I'm like, "That's not how that works in JSOC, baby."
Yeah.
We're humble. We have to stay humble, and we take our awards. And over the years, I had several of them emailed to me or mailed to me, and had some other awards that no one else in the Air Force has that sit on a pile of papers over there, and we're okay with that. If you're not, then that life is not for you. What we didn't do is toot our own whistles. Nobody knew what I was doing. The day I was leaving, I had to wear my uniform once, where I put on my blues and everything, and I had my Bronze Star on it. And I remember so many people walked up to me saying, "When'd you get that?" And I'm like, "I've been having it for 2 years." And they're like, "What?" So it was a big deal. I mean, CRNAs in the Air Force don't get Bronze Stars.
No, they don't.
And so it was a big deal, and they wanted to make a big deal of it. And I was like, "Nope, leave it as is. I'm fine." And that's how I roll, and that's how we kind of do our things, And I sport my Bronze Star on my truck, but that's about it, So.
The VA sends it to you.
Right.
My wife sent off for mine and put on my license.
Yeah, I'm proud of it, but the story behind it, no one really knows, and and I'm okay with that.
You do your job. That's what people ask me.
Right.
They say, "Well, how'd you get it?" And I go, "I did my job."
In the military, your job changes sometimes.
Yeah, it does. It does. I think that's what kept me in, is because every 3 years I'd say I'm going to get out,
mm-hmm.
and then they offer you another job
mm-hmm.
or something, and you live to deploy.
Yeah,
and that's what you do.
That's right.
You train, and that's another thing about an Army CRNA training. I know that a lot of people don't realize how we train or what we do and the things we do. The IV type of anesthesia that we can accomplish
mm-hmm.
that most people aren't comfortable in. Even when I became a civilian, doing some of the things I did, that
mm-hmm.
the anesthesiologist had wide eyes about. We don't do it that way.
That's right.
And
it's it's funny you talk about the Army CRNA. So when I got brought into that unit, I mean, I met some of the best CRNAs I've ever been around.
Did you ever work with Joel Ayler?
I know that name.
He was one of the first. He trained me. He was like
my main guy. My main guy was Jim Reed, and Paul. There's a couple other guys. I'd have to look at their names again. But those guys trained me, and I'm really the CRNA today because of them. And then you remember Ron Osman?
Yeah.
I got to mention him. I mean, when I got off active duty, I took my job in Huntsville. He hired me. Well, he was one of the first nurse anesthetists in that unit, and he's the only CRNA, talking about Ron Osman, he was in JSOC, that has combat jump wings as a CRNA. Him and one other guy have that.
He did that in Panama because I remember.
That's exactly where he got it.
People don't know this, that the Panama invasion was the hospital unit at Fort Bragg that jumped in, and then some people came in the periphery. Unfortunately, I was.
That's where he got it. He got it.
I wish, and that was one of my. I wish I could review something. I wish I'd gone to that, chosen that unit,
mm-hmm.
as opposed to going back to Fort Campbell,
mm-hmm.
because that was really cool what they did. And then to go there in the periphery and see
mm-hmm.
the aftermath and the show up there it was pretty. It was pretty phenomenal
mm-hmm.
what they did. And I know what they carried, those with the hospital units and with the fast teams, what we would carry. But did you ever carry the little canister.
Draw over?
The draw over. Yeah, I did think because at that point when you were doing it, it was all IV anesthesia.
I did all IV.
Yeah, it was all IV. But I remember having to tote that like draw over thing. And,
yeah.
And
they had them in the units. They would have them like.
It was weight. It was.
Yeah, I mean it.
And for the people that are listening, explain what draw over is and anesthesia and what.
So the Army, so the Army created this. The way we give anesthesia in the OR, 99.9% of the time, other than those of us who can do it these other ways, is the anesthesia gas is in a liquid form. We pour that liquid form into what we call a vaporizer, and oxygen and air run through the vaporizers and make this liquid a gas. And that's what you breathe in while you're sleeping. That's why we have to put tubes in your mouth and all that other stuff, because when you're under anesthesia, it's the gas that's keeping you asleep going through your lungs. So the Army came up with this thing, and it's called a draw-over vaporizer. And it's a little bitty canister that you pour the anesthesia gas or the liquid in. And we would hook it up to these patients, and a draw-over meant that they would draw the gas to them. So that patient had to be breathing spontaneously, which, not a big deal to maybe the audience, but most patients we got under anesthesia in the field are not breathing spontaneously, at least not by the time we get to them, because we put them to sleep because a surgeon needs to get into their abdomen and stop the bleeding like right now, or into their pelvis or whatever. So they can't breathe. We have to paralyze them. So then you have to come up with a way to figure that out, like how they can't breathe. So now we used to hook the machine. Remember the little 7.9.
What's it called? I can't remember. Yeah. It's the machine. It's the
757, not 747. I forget what it was. That one. It's a little ventilator. That's right. That's right. So then it'd be called a pushover instead of a draw over. And then we had we would do the pushover, a draw over, and we rigged up something else one time, and where we would put the Ambu bag on the ground and step on the Ambu bag to push it through. So it was all right. It was a pullover.
Yeah.
If you had it on the Ambu bag, you were pulling it over. Yeah. Then you had a pushover, which was the ventilator, and then the draw over was which if they were spontaneously breathing, which never worked because none of them. So what me and Rob did, and a lot of us guys, we did was called total intravenous anesthesia. So we would use these super drugs and a lot of the drugs we use on animals, on dogs. I took care of dogs in Special Forces. Also, these dogs were kill dogs, right? So we always had enough medicine to go around for the dogs and for the humans. And so we would use these drugs, and I would give you a little bit to put you to sleep if you weren't already unconscious. I'd paralyze you. I'd put the rest of that into a bag, and I would turn that bag on and just let it drip into your system, and it would keep you asleep. But you got to remember, a lot of the patients in those situations were bleeding out. They were blown up. They were hanging on to life.
They were earning their anesthesia.
So it didn't take a lot, really, until they started getting some blood pressure back. We got the big IVs in their necks. We carried some blood. I carried 5 or 6 units of blood. I carried some plasma.
Do you ever whole blood from somebody else?
Lots of whole blood. Yeah. Lots of whole blood. But we needed, but for whole blood, we needed to get to a forward operating base, and that was the main reason. FSTs, right? You're on FSTs.
Yeah.
FSTs normally, correct me if I'm wrong, 2 CRNAs, 4 surgeons, and everybody else with them.
You're right.
Typically.
That's an FST, but for the most part, we split them in half.
Right. So the reason why, that's what I'm going to. So the reason why they were split was because of JSOC.
Yeah.
Because our commanders wanted more assets out there.
Yeah.
Because most of them, you wouldn't do surgery all day long. So you have one guy there, 1 CRNA, 2 surgeons, and we'd split them up and put them in multiple places. That way, when I had a hit, we can fly in and we could go to a fob really close by, and we can start a whole blood draw because that's what they needed. They needed whole blood.
So for the
audience, that saved a lot of lives.
In whole blood Whole blood was the thing, because I remember on doing 225 units, that was a record I gave, and we had the Marines lined up, and that was on the base. That wasn't off fob. But because you won't say it, let me put this in perspective for the people that are listening to this. So everybody knows the Osama bin Laden raid, how that went down, and they lose the helicopter and everything. But they have to have somebody there because they thought they were going to get him alive. So basically, your team is with them, and you may be a half a click back, flying in the air, hovering in the air, waiting.
Yeah, we flew into Man, we flew into the air quite a bit.
Yeah,
I mean,
in Pakistan, you're
That's right.
hovering in the air, waiting, because if anybody gets hurt within a minute's time, or whatever, your hands are
Or
doing
on that
resuscitation
That's
right
right.
there. And then within 30 minutes, you better be somewhere
At a
else.
fob.
At the fob. And then then they'll do another surgery at the fob, stabilization, just get them stabilized.
Right.
And then you go to a cache.
Correct.
And
that's how we moved.
Yeah, that's how you move.
That's how you move patients.
Yeah,
and that was for combat, right?
Yeah.
And we were responsible for a lot of other things too that I really can't get into.
Yeah.
But we were trained, and it's happened many times, to do long trips of people under anesthesia. So there may be places maybe we're not supposed to be. Somebody took a hit, which has happened even recently. There's a nurse anesthetist and a surgeon working on that guy for hours sometimes in an airplane, in a
Longbow Chinook,
in a truck.
Yeah, her truck.
It happens, and you'll never hear about them.
Yeah.
It is one of the most secretive Tier 1 units. I'm talking about the medical side of this. I won't even name. I won't say what we call ourselves.
Yeah.
But it's one of the most secretive It's a Tier 1 unit that there is in the military. The medical side of it, believe it or not.
Yeah.
I mean, we had some studs, CRNAs, surgeons, and some other guys that made that team.
That's I've ever worked with.
They're awesome, and I learned so much from those guys. I mean, I went in wide-eyed. I mean, I was an Air Force guy. I thought they were going to treat me like shit. Man, they took me under their wing because they knew I had to be ready to go.
Yeah, that's another. We just had a guy that I interviewed not too long ago, and he was one of the first drone pilots for SF operations. And he didn't go through the pipeline like a lot of the guys do. They're operators, but all of a sudden he showed up there, and what is really amazing is when you're around this community is how professional they are. It's not like it's they're competitive, but the amount of professionalism, the mentorships, the teamwork that goes into it. I mean, they're literally your relatives.
Absolutely.
They're
yeah, I mean, you're brothers, and you have to be okay with them dying. I mean, that was a real possibility. I mean, there was always bullets flying. There's several stories. I won't even have enough time for me to start telling stories, but where we almost got shot out of the sky on certain aircraft and stuff like that. When I smell GP8, man, my hair on my back stands up. So we were always on helicopters and always on, around these things all the time. And the other day the lights went off in the OR where I was working, and I swear I was back in it. I mean, I immediately went back into this because in the military you didn't always have light. In fact, with JSOC we never had light. We literally did all these things we're talking about at night, 99% of the time. So I mean, you had to know where everything was at. You can't really work under NVGs. I mean, it's really not a thing. We had to wait until we got to altitude to turn a little bit of light on and start seeing. But you had better already started because the guy was going to die if we were actually doing something.
Let me ask you a question, and nobody in the audience will know what this is, but if anybody sees this that's in our world, they'll know. Did you ever do the pumpkin thing with the stylet? We put the stylet with the light down it, and you get the pumpkin sign.
We carried it. I never used it.
I used that one time, but it was just out of trying, just to do it. But I could have probably not used it. But
I did some crazy stuff out there just because you could, like retrograde wires.
Yeah, retrograde.
I learned I would never actually do that in real life. Just because it sucks.
Yeah.
But the pumpkin thing, I know what you're talking about. It's a lighted stylet with an ET2 on it.
And you see the
and you follow them. I never used it, but we had it.
Yeah.
I would either intubate them or we go right to crike. A lot of the guys that we took care of were in breaching accidents, so they breached the door and it blew up. And so now you're dealing with a head trauma and a face trauma type of thing.
Yeah.
Coming in full seizure. Let me see, a 230-pound guy in a full seizure. Yeah. That is not easy to do on a helicopter, on a stanchion.
Yeah.
Think about that. Put yourself in that position.
Yeah.
What would you do, Rob?
Yeah.
What would you do when a surgeon goes, Ben, what you going to do? What you going to do? He's tearing the helicopter to pieces because he's in full seizure, full kit on. What you gonna do?
You just gotta put it.
How you gonna stop it? How you gonna stop it?
You got it. Well,
how you gonna stop it?
You gotta hit him with some benzos or just knock him out right away, put him to sleep.
You know what I did? He's in full seizure. He's got a bloody face and a full beard. You know what I did?
What'd you do?
I hit him with 200 of succinylcholine right in his thigh.
You know,
And the surgeon goes, "What'd you give him?" I said, "Succinylcholine." He goes, "Oh shit." I said, "Oh shit is right." So that guy's got a scar in his beard from here to here now.
Wow.
Saved his life.
So succinylcholine is a neuromuscular blocker, and you can give it IM. We usually give it IV, but yeah, that works.
You can't.
Him.
Yeah, what you can do with this guy?
Yeah.
You can't do anything.
He's
breaking the helicopter to pieces, man.
Yeah,
This guy's
30 seconds it's going to take place. But what happens? Tell them.
I was on a helicopter flying.
Tell them the danger in doing that. I mean, what did you buy?
So when that happens, you're totally paralyzed for 7 minutes. IM is probably more like 15 minutes.
Yeah.
So you have to establish an airway.
So yeah.
So we're at night. So we're at night on a helicopter with rotors spinning. We have Peltor headphone or head things on that we're talking through. We have very little light that we're working with, and full seizure. And this guy's got a full beard, which in anesthesia world, you tough to put a mask on that person to breathe for them. I can't see how big his neck is. This guy's gigantic, muscular killer is who he is, right? And you got to get an airway. He's not going to breathe for 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And so when we give that drug in the OR, right, that's a code blue in any situation. I tell students this all the time. Whenever we give our drugs in the OR, it's a code blue. In any other situation, that patient, their heart's beating, but they're not breathing. And that is the first thing in CPR you deal with, right? Well, we do that on purpose to 85% of our patients.
Yeah.
So our money is made by dealing with that. And we do that because we have to put an airway in for surgery. Well, in this situation, I'm giving this stuff just because he's so big and strong, he's tearing everything apart. And there's no way I can get an IV on the guy. I didn't carry benzodiazepines. I carried scopolamine.
Yeah, that's
I carried scopolamine, Versed, and ketamine. Not Versed. Scopolamine, succinylcholine, and ketamine.
Yeah.
And pancuronium, which is a long-acting paralytic. Yeah. That's all I carried. Vecuronium sometimes. And, we had to stop this guy. But I had the confidence I had, and I'm talking like now because I actually can think about it and how scary that should have been. But honestly, I know I had one of the best surgeons in the world. I mean, he's in that unit. He's one of the best surgeons in the world. I knew that he and I could handle this situation. I knew that with 100% confidence. The guy was going to die anyway. I mean, big old head injury, big bloody mouth. There was no way anybody's getting an arrow on this guy without putting a crike through him. There's no way.
Yeah.
And I wasn't even sweating at that point.
Yeah.
We got his airway. I mean, nothing was even said between us. It was that smooth. Yeah. This is that night, flying a helicopter. And look, all the guys that I worked that were in that unit, all these CRNAs, they've all done this. Yeah. They've all done things like this.
Yeah.
We collectively have so many good stories. They're incredible.
You say that.
A lot of people died. Hey, look, let me put this out there.
Yeah.
We didn't save everybody. In fact, I would say the vast majority of them probably died.
Yeah. Because they're so traumatic.
Right. Exactly.
But what always shocked me was there was times when I would get I hated shoulder injuries because you just didn't know what you would get into. And there was times when I thought it was going to be an easy save, and it didn't turn out well. There was times when somebody was a triple amp, and you thought there's no way, and they end up, they survive. So you never give up, even when you think,
it's full court press.
Yeah.
It's full court press,
yeah.
And we did a lot of that. There were a lot of guys that, in the civilian world, and Rob can attest to this. People don't die on the table, right? They just don't die under anesthesia. We've all had our ones or twos over 20 years, whatever. That doesn't happen. In combat, it happens all the time.
Yeah.
You're the last guy most of these kids have seen.
Yeah.
And the ones they've talked to, because their last question is always, am I going to die? And obviously, it's always absolutely not. You're going to see your mom again. That didn't happen very often. I mean, when they were bleeding out like that, it was very, even at a forward operating base with whole blood, a lot of those kids died,
I think that
they were alive just with a little bit of adrenaline pumping through their brains. And as soon as we'd spin that can and turn that poison on, the anesthesia, they die. I mean, there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah.
So
I know that there was anesthesia providers who would come back, especially I think when the back day was really kicking up, and they were sometimes they just weren't right. They weren't handling things well. And at the time, I always wondered, can't be that bad, because I'd had deployments and it didn't really seem that bad. But I think what you just said really is probably one of the hardest things that when anesthesia providers think back, over all the trauma, is you are the last person.
Absolutely. That's right.
And I think that's one of the hardest things is you're like, you're going to be okay. You're the last person they see.
Yeah. You got to give them some hope.
Yeah, you got to give them some
Even
hope.
though
And then
what's going to happen.
Yeah.
I mean, once you've done that enough, maybe the first one I didn't know was going to happen. Maybe the second one I didn't know was going to happen. By the time I got to the third one, I knew what I was dealing with. And even as aggressive as we became with, blood and big line, I mean, you could read it. You just kind of knew that it's full court press, but this is going to be difficult to say.
Having a heart in your hand telling them to, crank up the blood.
Exactly.
The heart's empty.
That's right.
That's a place that most anesthesia providers don't. But
we did.
Army, Air Force, Special Ops, CRNAs. That's what we do.
And I think one of the questions that you didn't ask me, as far as my experience, right? Yeah. So I was in for active duty for 10 years. I did 4 combat tours in my 10 years. 3 of those years I was in school. So really in 7 years I did 4 combat tours.
Yeah.
And then I stayed in the reserves, retired as a lieutenant colonel. Didn't do much in the reserves, mainly teaching what I had learned. Yeah. I would go to Camp Bullis on most of my weekends, and I would teach. And it was awesome because, when I was a major, I'd walk into Camp Bullis and say, hey, they would be showing something like this, these Air Force guys. And I was like, wait up, this is not going to work. You're too heavy, because everybody's trying to fly now, right? This won't get on a helicopter, this won't do this. Nobody will listen to me. The day I made lieutenant colonel, I happened to be there, and I walk in there with my little silver stars, and I walk in there and I'm like, hey, this isn't going to work. And they're like, oh yeah, you hear lieutenant? Like now, they all listen to me. And I'm like, I'm the same guy I was 6 weeks ago.
I found that out too. And so I was, I was in the line unit for years, and I was enlisted. And lieutenant colonel, for people that or understand the military, there's this transformation happens to me, because you could be battalion commander, or you're a hospital deputy commander, or a commander. And I remember I walked into a line unit, and I forgot I was a lieutenant colonel at the time, and I just made lieutenant colonel. And I walk in, and there's probably 300 guys in there, and it's like everybody comes, and I'm looking around for the person. Like I locked up too, and I'm looking around like who's in the room, and I realized it was me. Yeah.
That's right. It's true.
Yeah, it's true.
I know
people listening.
I know some CRNAs that I worked with that were with the National Guard back in the day, like in college, 20 years ago, and he saw something about me on, I don't know, Facebook or something. He calls me. He's like, man, I want to hear about your Bronze Star. I want to hear about this and that. And I'm like, well, so we ain't got time for all this. He goes, and I think at the time I was like a major. He goes, you're a major? He goes, I've never even seen a captain.
Yeah.
Like he was saying, he did 4 years in that. He never ever seen a captain. He saw lieutenants. So he was like, you're a major? I'm like, well, actually, I'm a lieutenant colonel. He's like, what? Like he just blew his mind.
Yeah.
And it's funny because those of us on the medical side kind of get cold to that. We don't really, because we're all officers and stuff like that, but
it's not a big deal.
But to the big military, it is a big deal.
Yeah.
And I tend to forget that. Yeah. And you clearly forgot it too. Yeah. So it was a good deal.
All right, brother.
Hey, man.
All right, man. Man, it's I interview all these war fighters, and you're the first person I've ever interviewed that did the same thing.
MOS.
Same MOS.
Right.
And it's really neat because most people don't know what CRNAs are in the Army, and it was a cool life. It really was. And I really appreciate. Thank you for what you did.
Yeah.
Thank you for your service. Thank you for being on the channel. Thank you for supporting the Honor Cafe in the Hall of Heroes.
I'm here all the time.
Yeah, and if you haven't been down to Honor Cafe, if you're especially a veteran, amazing food and amazing camaraderie.
Yeah, right now. An amazing place.
Yep. Yeah. All right.
Place that we need.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob.